Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, the seminal horror franchise of the 80s, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the potential and problems of bringing the infamous Freddy Krueger to Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight is a game that purports to be a horror hall of fame, a gallery of rogues and monsters from the genre where the express goal is to keep you up at night. In that regard, there's one franchise guaranteed to make you lose sleep. A Nightmare on Elm Street and its dream demon Freddy Krueger, who waits till you fall asleep to kill you in your nightmares. When you think of a classic slasher icon, Freddy is one of the first characters you'll think of alongside Jason, Michael and Leatherface. But this begs the question, why has Behaviour never thought to integrate him into Dead by Daylight before? He could have a really interesting power, using the dynamics of the dream world to pull survivors into his territory and turn the rules of the trials upside down. Freddy's got so much character too. Imagine what we could do with voice lines from Robert Englund in the same vein as Pinhead or Chucky. Hell, I'd even take Jackie L. Haley's version, if it meant that we got to play with Freddy in DBD. It really does feel like a no-brainer. We've got such out there licenses like Alien, Crypt TV and even Dungeons & Dragons, so why haven't we had Freddy yet? Okay, the joke's gone long enough. I was going to try and keep it up for the entire video, but frankly, I don't have the patience for that, and something tells me that you don't either. Dead by Daylight does in fact have Freddy Krueger in it. But I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't realised it yet. For almost his whole time as part of this game, Freddy has been an afterthought, something you'd find on the bottom of your shoe, and just about everyone's tier lists as well. There's almost never been a time in DBD history where he didn't suck ass. But that wouldn't be enough for him to be worth a video on its own. DBD's got a lot of weak killers and Freddy is most definitely one of them, but being weak hasn't stopped many other killers from accruing loyal fan bases. Pig, Myers, Trapper, all really bad killers who've been able to maintain a player base. Hell, Legion's a shit killer. Everyone knows Legion's a shit killer, and yet they remain actively popular. One of the most played killers in the game. But not Freddy. According to Nightlight, Freddy is the second least played killer in the game right now, behind only Hag. He's played less than Twins and Singularity and Artist, killers that everyone knows nobody plays, and that's particularly wild when you consider how beloved the character of Freddy Krueger is. Until Xenomorph's release, I firmly believe Freddy Krueger was the most recognisable horror name to the general public of any of DBD's licensed characters. Freddy was such a pop culture sensation that he had his own TV show, Freddy's Nightmares, where Freddy took on the role of a host to an anthology horror series. Freddy was huge back in the day, and retains a lot of his pop culture recognisability, but doesn't seem to translate into in-game popularity. So today we're going to be performing an autopsy on this killer who seems to have died a most untimely death in the fog, figure out the cause of death, and potentially see if we can bring Lazarus back to life. Finishing off with a rework concept that I think would be a good starting point to turn Freddy Krueger into the nightmare he was always meant to be. But before we do, I'm sure we've all had the nightmare of overpaying for our games, but the channel's partner Instant Gaming is right here to put that nightmare to bed for good. Instant Gaming will give you some chunky discounts on games and DLCs for PC and console. Stock up on any DBD chapters that you're missing, including the Nightmare on Elm Street chapter and the upcoming D&D chapter. Or perhaps you can take a look at newer games like Little Kitty Big City, or the long-awaited arrival of Ghost of Tsushima on PC. By using the link in the description, you can enjoy these fantastic discounts and support the channel at the same time. It's a win-win, really. Thanks to Instant Gaming for sponsoring the channel, and now, let's get ready for Freddy. We're going to start by identifying the problems with Freddy's power as a mechanical element, a piece of Dead by Daylight's typical gameplay loop, because the issues with Freddy's gameplay are pretty hard to miss. The obvious start is that even among DBD's weaker killers, Freddy is a special kind of shit. Like, I'm not talking Doctor or Sadako, that they could use some buffs type killers, I'm talking bottom 3, chilling at the ass end of D tier. Freddy's power does a lot of things very badly. His stealth is bad to begin with, but gets worse when you realise the visual terror radius indicator exists, so the fact that the lullaby is so quiet means very little. And his chase power is incredibly anemic, only coming into play if the survivor is already asleep, with a hinder that's so pitiful that it makes clown and skull merchants' hinders look like a stun. His snares aren't effective or consistent enough to be proper traps, while also not being smooth or impactful enough to be a proper chase tool in a lot of tiles. His map mobility is the one thing he has going for him, and it's very conditional. It's on a lengthy cooldown, it's very telegraphed and limited so that it can't be used as form of lethality. It gets more and more limited as gens get completed, and maps are getting smaller, meaning that map traversal is less of a major concern for killers these days. You know the power is bad when the biggest benefit that it gives you as a killer is a built-in reshade filter so that you can see better on dark maps like Autohaven. And yet he has a surprisingly high kill rate, according to Behaviour anyway. tied for the 3rd highest in the game alongside Pinhead. So the answer here probably isn't to straight buff him. Whether it's because the dream world is confusing or just because he is really easy to play, Freddy seems to be a destroyer of large swaths of newer or less skilled players, so buffing him to the degree that he probably should be buffed to make him a good killer against skilled players might just make him completely dominant everywhere else. His issue is an issue of design and less so of power. His power kind of always has to be bad the way it is because there's so little to it, and any buffs that he got would be token buffs that wouldn't change his placement on a tier list very much. A lot of killers have this problem, where they're kept artificially weaker than they have to be because elements could become problematic if they're buffed. Legion is by far and away the most obvious example of this, but this applies to Sadako, Michael, Doctor, Pig, loads of killers. Even Skull Merchant falls victim to this. But don't you worry, I'll be doing a whole video about her issues another time. This is why, in my opinion, the answer to Freddy isn't just tuning and numbers buffing him, but another rework. Something to give his power more skill expression to give him room to get buffed. But strength alone is not the only reason Freddy's pick rate is so badly inhibited. Like Michael and Trapper, Freddy's base power is comprehensively bad. Unlike Michael and Trapper, Freddy doesn't even have good add-ons to compensate for this. At least Mikey and Evan can put on Tombstone Piece, Fragrant Tuft, Bloody Coil or Honing Stone to cosplay as a C-tier killer. Freddy is shit. No matter what you put on him, he'll always be shit. So to play him, you pretty much have to accept the fact that you're going to be aggressively limited by his power regardless of your build. That is understandably not a good feeling, and certainly drives players away from the killer, but it does not stop there. Just because a killer is really bad, doesn't mean they can't be satisfying against players shit enough to lose to them in solo queue. Even in the case of Dead by Daylight's worst killers, they at least can be passably fun to play when the thing the killer is meant to do works out the way the player wants it to. Michael and Trapper are both great examples of this. Sneaking up on somebody with Myers to stalk them from an off angle for an instant down, or watching a trap that you set down half a match ago catch somebody out at a critical juncture are memorable moments that you play the killer to experience. They're not fun for everyone, and the killer is still bad, but the feedback that you get from playing the killer well in a way that pays off is undeniably tangible, and it gives these killers reasonable, enduring popularity despite their vast shitness. Freddy doesn't have that visceral moment of, ha, got him, very often, like the other weak killers do. And that, I think, makes his shitness impossible to ignore while playing him. Even when he's winning, it doesn't feel like you're winning, it just feels like the survivors are losing. This is due to one of the more unfortunate parts of Freddy's design for everyone. When they work, dream snares resulting in a hit doesn't feel like you've done anything impressive, because you kinda haven't. The hinder is so insignificant that you find yourself doubting whether or not it was even useful in the first place, but it's also so non-committal that you don't really need to think about how you place them or when you place them. You put them down, they probably don't do much of anything, and if they do, you might get a hit. That's the be-all and end-all of it. There's not much to say to satisfying about, and that's a major contributor to Freddy's unpopularity. That's not to say there aren't any players who find Freddy satisfying. He's clearly picked by some people after all, but for the life of me, I couldn't understand why. So I decided to ask Twitter and Reddit to bring me the Freddy players so that they could tell me what made him an appealing killer to play. I didn't expect a ton of responses, but I got loads, and that made the ones that I did get all the more insightful. The general responses that I seem to get affirm that Freddy's player base largely sticks around for the vibes. Some folks really like the license or the character, others enjoy the little details like the blood splattering out of generators for his teleport, or they like the dream filter applied to the map. Honestly, I like that too. A lot of his fun also seems to revolve around the dream palette and the way that, if they work, Freddy can catch players out and trick them. A unique mechanic identity tied to his add-ons that unfortunately make him even worse than he already is. But regardless of the fact that dream palettes instead of snares are almost a direct nerf, I think looking at what palettes symbolise in Freddy's kit highlights Freddy's other problem that prevents players from identifying with him and can point us in the right direction for a solution. The idea of survivors falling for a fake palette is perfectly on brand for an element of Freddy that otherwise goes mostly unexplored in his gameplay. Freddy is a psychological killer, one who manipulates the dream world in twisted ways just to fuck with you because he's a sadistic asshole and that's what he does. In every Nightmare on Elm Street film, from the first one that brought us to Springwood Slasher for the first time, to the remake starring Jackie L. Haley, Freddy's sadism has always expressed itself in him playing with his food a bit. Before we talk any more about the films or the character, I want to address a major frustration point I know a lot of players have about DBD's version of Freddy. A major reason a lot of people avoid Freddy when they otherwise wouldn't is because we've specifically got not the classic Robert Englund Freddy, the actor that turned Freddy Krueger into a household name in the 80s and 90s, but the Jackie L. Haley portrayal of the character in the notoriously panned remake in 2010. A lot of folks cannot stand the remake Freddy, and a Robert Englund legendary cosmetic or re-release for Freddy is one of those popular requests of the community with regards to Freddy. But unfortunately, I doubt that could ever happen. If it could, it probably would have done by now. Although I think if Freddy was released today, behaviour would pursue the classic Robert Englund iteration, and possibly even get Englund himself in to voice the character, in the same way they did for Doug Bradley for Pinhead, or Brad Dourif and Jennifer Tilly for Chucky and Tiffany. Sadly though, I think that ship has sailed. The best we could hope for someday is maybe New Line allowing Kyle Gallner's likeness if we're really lucky, or maybe even getting Jackie L. Haley into the studio to voice Freddy if, the stars align. But if you ask me, the specific version of Freddy DBD uses wouldn't necessarily matter if the power really felt like Freddy. Regardless of the tonal and substantive differences between the two versions of the character, if the power feels like Freddy, it'll likely make the difference between the remake and original versions a moot point. Right now, Freddy doesn't feel like Freddy should when you're playing him, which makes the fact that this isn't the Freddy that most people would want painfully obvious. But if Freddy's power was changed in a way that was more evocative of the specific kind of evil that Freddy is, then I doubt most people would care anymore. In the dream world, Freddy is all but omnipotent. As long as you're afraid of him enough, he can do whatever he wants to you, and will find ways to prolong your torment before killing you in whatever way he finds gratifying or simply funny at the time. That's what makes Englund's Freddy especially a compelling watch even in his weaker films. His performances were so charismatic that you could get on board with his theatrical nonsense and share in the joy that he took tormenting his victims. And even in the remake version, where much of his charisma and silliness was toned down to make Freddy scary again, he still very much plays with his food. He's a psychological terror who combines the mundane, petty sadism of a serial killer with the reality-warping power of a supernatural horror. Like if Pazuzu from The Exorcist pulled legs off of spiders for fun. Most killers in the entity's realm get the job done in whatever way they specialise in, but Freddy hands down has the best time doing it. He could be efficient and brutal if he wanted to be, but where's the fun in that? Aside from the fact that more scared victims are easier prey for him in the dream world, he just gets off on the suffering he inflicts, and the power that he holds over his victims, which is pretty textbook psychopath behaviour if I'm honest with you. The whole experience of killing is a power trip to him, and the more elaborate every kill is, the greater the high he gets from it. And that's what a lot of Freddy players have said still clicks with them about the character, and especially the fake palette add-ons. So many responses here focus on using power elements like the dream palettes and the teleports to fake survivors out, or highlight other areas of Freddy's design like his animations that really make you feel like you're playing a malicious, sadistic arsehole playing tricks on the survivors. Whatever the future holds for Freddy, I think this is the design imperative that should be focused on. Regardless of his power level, Freddy's power should be evocative of that specific trickster nature that characterises Freddy, and with that in mind, I have a rework drafted that I'd like you to read. The idea going into it was to combine elements of old Freddy, which was the most evocative and Freddy-accurate version of Freddy's power that you ever had, but had significant problems in its gameplay that limited what the killer was able to do, and the new version, which allowed Freddy to function as an M1 killer, but stripped away a lot of what made him interesting. What made him Freddy. Because, let me be clear about something, Freddy does need a rework, and desperately. In my opinion, now that 3-Gen Skull Merchant and John Scamper have been dealt with, the last few killers have been broadly good, and the game as a whole is in a stable place, there's never been a better time for Freddy to get a rework, and there's no priority killer out there greater than him, in my opinion. He's a killer in crisis, and the calls for a Freddy 3.0 rework to bring him up to the standards of a modern killer design are becoming increasingly loud. So, here's what I've got. Let me know what you think. Freddy Krueger, otherwise known as the Nightmare, has the power Dream Demon. Survivors start the trial awake, and when the trial begins, survivors are put on a 2-minute sleep timer, trackable with clock overlays on their portraits. Awake survivors cannot see Freddy or hear his terror radius, and Freddy cannot harm awake survivors and has no collision with them. But if he's within 16 meters, the Freddy lullaby will play to any awake survivors. Freddy's terror radius will play normally inside the dream world though, just like it used to on old Freddy. At the end of the 2-minute timer, survivors will fall asleep and be pulled directly into the dream world. Don't worry, Freddy can make this timer much shorter than 2 minutes, but we'll get into that later. When a survivor falls asleep, their body will fall to the ground and they will become a dream walker, their soul navigating the dream world as their body sleeps. Unlike awake survivors, dreamwalkers can be harmed by Freddy. They have collision with him, and they can see him fine. And they can do normal game actions like unhooking, healing, sabotage, etc. The only actions a dreamwalker cannot do that they could normally are generators and exit gates, but more on that later. Injuries and status effects applied to dreamwalkers will be applied to their sleeping bodies. For example, if a dreamwalker becomes injured, both the dreamwalker form and their sleeping body will receive the injury and bleed. And perks that would apply to the survivor, like Dark Devotion or Streetwise, apply to the sleeping body as well as the Dreamwalker form. This is the single biggest change to Freddy I'm suggesting, and it brings his design in line with old Freddy. He's all-powerful in the dream world, but can't exist outside of it, and has to wait until the survivor falls asleep before he can harm them, or before they can perceive him. But how do you fall asleep? Survivors fall asleep in one of two ways. Their 2-minute timer puts them to sleep passively, or Freddy's power, Dream Master, is used to accelerate the timer. When a survivor wakes up by any means, they wake up in their sleeping body, back where they were first put to sleep in the first place. Any survivor Freddy downs will wake up instantly. Freddy gains Killer Instinct on them, and any survivor within 12 meters of the body for 6 seconds, and can teleport directly to the body during that time using the power button. Aside from being downed, survivors can wake up in one of two ways. Either an awake teammate can wake them up in a 16-second interaction, or they can complete a bring to light action to wake themselves up. Remember how I said that Dreamwalkers can't repair or open gates? In the dream world, the standard repair and open gate action that survivors can perform on generators and gates is replaced by bring to light. Bring to light actions take 8 seconds and require constant merciless storm skill checks for the duration to complete. Accomplishing this will wake the survivor up in their sleeping body and restart their sleep timer from 2 minutes. But failing it allows Freddy to teleport instantly to their location for 8 seconds using the power button once the action has failed. No more waking yourself up by failing skill checks, no more clocks, because the gens are your clocks now. Another survivor waking you up will take much longer to do, because now waking you up teleports you across half the map to where you were first put to sleep. So it has to be a long interaction to prevent coordinated players using it to pull a survivor out of a chase easily. Bring to light actions replacing generators also gives Freddy a form of base kit slowdown. You literally can't progress the game until you wake up, meaning that for the first time possibly ever, the dream world is something that you cannot stay in for longer than you have to. The dream world is Freddy's dominion, and if he can't hurt you outside of it, and staying in it needs to be something you avoid at all costs. But how does Freddy put you to sleep? This brings in his power, Dream Master. Freddy's M2 has him point a beam at you, kind of like Moira's biotic grasp, if that makes sense, at awake survivors. And while the beam is touching a survivor, their sleep timer accelerates to 15 times its normal speed. This will put a fully awake survivor to sleep in 8 seconds. During this time, Freddy can be seen by the targeted survivor as they are pulled into the Dreamwalker state. The Dream Beam has a 10-meter range and slows Freddy to 3.86 meters as long as he's holding it out. This is intended to be a modernization of old Freddy's sleep mechanics, where he would pick a target and they would gradually fall asleep during a 10-second transition period between the asleep and awake states, and the survivor could see him flicker in and out of existence during this time. In the case of old Freddy, this period was way too long. You gave survivors so much time to find a safe resource after you started to sleep them that you started the chase at a huge disadvantage. But if you make the time too short, Freddy just gets a free hit, and that's why the transition period was nerfed in the first place. So I thought a good way to compromise this would be to make actually sleeping a survivor somewhat skill expressive, having to maintain a beam to accelerate their sleep timer, and giving the survivor the means to delay Freddy sleeping them by trying to break line of sight with him. Is it at the side effect of also making the passive sleep timer feel more impactful as a better integrated part of his power? The closer they are to passively falling asleep, the faster it is for Freddy to finish the job manually. What I'm describing so far sounds largely like a revamp of original Freddy, with the wake up and sleep mechanics modified but broadly still the same. Can't interact with you until you're asleep, Dreamworld applies slowdown and forces you to wake up to progress the game, but I want to talk now about what new Freddy did best. The Dream Palette mechanic, and introduction of Freddy's ability to misdirect players and catch them out while asleep. Dream Palettes, by being very popular, are both very limited in terms of number and in their application. So why don't we go one step further, and let Freddy have Dream everything. Let's talk about his chase power, Dream Props. Freddy's power has 12 tokens. Using the quote-unquote Dream Beam for 1 second on any space where a pallet could be placed, will place a Dream Palette there at the cost of 1 token. that will be refunded when the pallet is dropped. Pretty much the same as current Dream pallets, really. Using the Dream beam on any interactable object other than a generator, window, pallet or exit gate for 2 seconds will turn it into a Dream prop at the cost of 1 of your tokens. When Freddy's within 18 meters of any non-pallet Dream prop, he can teleport to it instantly, using the power button with a unique animation. For example, a Dream totem might light up in a column of fire and he steps out of it. Or he might open a Dream breakable wall like a door and step through, could jump out of a Dream locker. And this will turn the Dream prop back into a regular prop. Dream walkers within 8 meters of the prop will scream when Freddy arrives at teleport destination, and the Dream token will be refunded to Freddy. The teleport travels at the same speed as direct teleporting in Nightfall, and will be on an 8-second cooldown. This is how you down survivors stuck in the Dream world. Yep, I've made another trap killer. The idea was inspired by The Unknown, who uses hallucinations in a similar way, and can constantly wind up and wind down UVX to place hallucinations intentionally across the map for use in Chase. Unknown and Dredge both have mid-chase teleportation options that remain very popular mechanics that evoke the idea of an omnipresent psychological horror, and that's what Freddy is. With the unique little twist that everything in the Dream world becomes a weapon to Freddy. He should have survivors in the Dream world second-guessing everything they see, because anything could be used against you. It's all a pawn in Freddy's great game that he's playing with you. It would bring the misdirection and gotcha elements of playing with fake pallets into the base kit, and would make it more versatile and lethal. It would make Freddy utterly terrifying in the Dream world, and would appropriately express the disorienting, reality-warping power of a demon in control of your nightmares. And I've brought some add-ons too. You might notice some of these effects look familiar, like Pill Bottle being a carrying add-on, Black Box being an obsession add-on that prevents waking up, Swing Chains adding extra slowdown. Consider it another testament to what Freddy used to be. Tell me what you think. So yeah, that's what I think will be done with Freddy's power. And while I don't think anything like this will ever happen, I imagine this year will bring major changes to Freddy, and it is most definitely overdue. Despite his crippling weaknesses and rampant unpopularity, Freddy has one of the highest kill rates in the game, meaning that straight up buffing him might be a hard sell to behaviour given how much he seems to confuse and demolish newer or less skilled players. If behaviour wants Freddy to be a part of the game that is functional, one that won't make him terrorise new players but actually stand a snowball's chance against survivors playing with their monitors on, something big needs to change. I think behaviour probably knows this, so fingers crossed that year 9 is the year that Freddy makes the comeback he's always deserved.